When there's a crash, I hope it's going to be during this next 12 months, because I don't want to be Herbert Hoover.
The trade war was painful for farmers the first time around, but this time it could be much worse because the tariffs are bigger, the retaliation is bigger, and the economy is feeling more brittle.
Just overall, the economy is collapsing as a result of Donald Trump's trade policies and Donald Trump's policies overall, his economic policies.
Trump is shrinking the U.S. economy, and the experts have their say. But of course, his supporters will say fake news, so lies, and all those stuff. So today, let's break down and see why top economists are warning about a financial disaster under Trump reign. Let's check those economists.
The goals Trump has with tariffs seem to be three things. One is he uses the tariffs as a threat. Number two is for government revenue. Third, he says that tariffs will rebuild the American industry. None of this makes sense. For China, the threats don't mean very much because the U.S. market, while significant, is not so important strategically for China. The U.S. is a relatively small and shrinking part of the Chinese export direction. When it comes to revenues, the American political system is we call it a pay-for-play system. Rich people give money, and then they get the policies that they want. You could also call it a very corrupt political system, which I do. And so the idea is there will be tax cuts for the rich, and then the poorer people will pay tariffs. Actually, if you look at the numbers, none of it makes sense because the tariffs will never generate much revenue, period. Then when it comes to building industry, you don't build industry through protectionism. We will get outmoded industry. We will not get competitive industry. China will be competitive internationally in electric vehicles, for example. The United States will be high cost behind a tariff wall. So yes, the United States will produce some electric vehicles, but they won't be able to compete with BYD, for example. What the American foreign policy is aiming for is dominance. It's aiming for primacy. It's aiming for hegemony, depending on whatever term you want to use. But this is not a sensible objective.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack. So what he's saying is Trump tax tariff and trade wars with China are pushing the economy in the wrong direction, right? And look, they aren't just talking, they have numbers to back it up, all right? So let's check another evidence.
This is a map that shows the impact of tariffs on farmers across the country. Hundreds of thousands of them work in industries that are impacted by tariffs. These are the states that voted for Trump, and you can see the overlap. China and Canada placed retaliatory tariffs focusing on the Midwest and the South, and that's intentional. This is meant to send a message to the president and apply pressure to Republicans who have to answer to their own constituents. Farming is an easy target because the United States exports more than $100 billion of agricultural goods each year. Let's look at where I'm from, Iowa. Iowa is a top producer of corn, it's a major producer of soybeans, which is a big export, and it's the second largest agricultural exporting state. The state's largest export market is Canada, and the fourth largest is China. For farmers, these kinds of export sales can determine whether they stay afloat. China and Canada place tariffs on corn, soybeans, and a list of other U.S. farm products. This makes it more expensive for buyers to purchase U.S. farm goods. That can make the buyers turn to cheaper products from Argentina or Brazil instead, and it's hard for U.S. farmers to get those markets back. Farmers have been the target of trade wars before, like in Trump's first term, when agricultural exports plummeted by more than $27 billion. The impact was so bad that the White House had to bail out farmers with subsidies of over $20 billion. Trump gave several buckets of payments to farmers in his first term, for the trade war, for pandemic assistance, and some said that was an effort to shore up their political support. Farmers are still a strong voting bloc for Trump. About 77% voted for President Trump. The trade war was painful for farmers the first time around, but this time it could be much worse because the tariffs are bigger, the retaliation is bigger, and the economy is feeling more brittle. Since the industries impacted will disproportionately affect his base, Trump has changed his tone on tariffs from this,
Tariffs are going to make us rich as hell. It's going to bring our country's businesses back.
to something a bit more realistic.
We may have short-term a little pain, and people understand that.
When you get into these tit-for-tat cycles of tariffs and retaliation, trade wars can spiral out of control, and that can have very painful consequences for farmers and other everyday Americans.
See, this is what people don't want to hear. The economy isn't just about big stock market numbers or nice words. It's just about real people feeling the squeeze, right? Okay, let's check another people, how they feel about that.
Tourism in America is facing a government-induced crisis right now. Some of America's closest historical allies, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, have issued travel advisories to their citizens about visiting America. International travel in the U.S. has been on the rise, and forecasts projected a 9% increase in 2025. However, those projections have now been revised down, with some estimates showing at least a 5% decline and possibly even worse. If we take a closer look at the Canadian travel plans, that 5% drop might be a serious understatement. Bookings for summer flights from Canada to the U.S. have fallen off a cliff. They are down more than 70% compared to last year. U.S. Travel Association warns that a 10% reduction in Canadian visitors alone could result in a $2.1 billion loss in travel spending and cost 14,000 American jobs. If the Canadian travel to the U.S. were to drop, say, like 70% to mirror the airline travel, that would be around 100,000 American jobs lost. What if our other allies follow Canada's lead? The economic damage could be catastrophic. Travel and tourism sectors account for about 6% of American jobs and 2% of the U.S. GDP. A steep decline in international travel would ripple across industries from airlines, hotels, restaurants, and retail, hitting local economies incredibly hard. Right now, the full extent of the fallout is uncertain, but one thing is clear: if international visitors stop coming, the impact on the U.S. economy will be felt nationwide and by everyone.
Yep, this is what matters, right? While Trump brags about winning, all those stuff, then regular people out here losing jobs, losing savings, and mainly losing hope, right? Yeah, it's crazy.
Hopes the stock market crashes in the next 12 months.
We have an economy that's incredible. We have an economy that's so fragile. And the only reason it's running now is it's running off the fumes of what we did, what the Trump administration. It's just running off the fumes. And when there's a crash, I hope it's going to be during this next 12 months, because I don't want to be Herbert Hoover.
The stock market is not owned by Wall Street hedge fund fat cats. The stock market, who owns the stock market? Pension funds, insurance companies, 401ks, firefighters, teachers, nurses, who are checking their 401ks every night to figure out, can I retire in the next 5 years? But Donald Trump wants the market to crash.
So the uncertainty of tariffs, not tariffs, tariffs on certain industries, not certain industries, is actually having a knock-on effect to some industries, and one of the industries that's actually having a knock-on effect is the oil industry in the United States. I think it's worth noting that as production goes up and oil goes down in price, that is not a good recipe for profits. And so we've seen this recently, as you know, I'm sure you know. Some bad news for the U.S. economy. Chevron, very strong in the southern states, is laying off 20% of its workforce. It's not going to wait to see what happens tomorrow. It's laying off its workforce. We are looking at job losses so far in the oil industry in this month of over 30,000 U.S. jobs lost. Not could be, not will be, actual jobs lost. And that does not take into consideration the 20% that Chevron are cutting.
And it is not just few people complaining. This is happening across the country. But of course, Trump supporters and Trump, of course, will tell you everything is great, everything is in control. But no.
Wyoming can't pay its bills. And the reason for that is their economy is shrinking. The freeze on foreign workers and the deportations have stopped people from coming to work, so cattle ranchers don't have people to work on their farms. Just overall, the economy is collapsing as a result of Donald Trump's trade policies and Donald Trump's policies overall, his economic policies. And so as you watch Wyoming, just remember that that's the first domino. There will be others. There'll be other states that are in a similar situation. It might be Florida next as their real estate collapses. And of course, they started to experience this earlier on because of Florida policies about foreign workers. And so as the U.S. economy shrinks, the U.S. economy is going to shrink. We're going to see a situation where the U.S. government may not be able to meet its debt obligations. They will not be able to meet their day-to-day operational obligations. They already struggle to meet that. They borrow, right, to be able to cover it. But as their economy shrinks, their capacity to borrow is going to become significantly reduced. And when they are not in a position to actually meet their debt obligations, period, we are going to see significant problems. And if you were around in the 1970s and you remember what New York was like in the 1970s, New York was basically bankrupt in the 1970s. They sought a federal government bailout, never came. And it was a miserable situation for people. You can get a feel of where things are going to go and how it's going to be with a shrinking U.S. economy. As the U.S. looks inward, they will, they may say, look, we are self-reliant, and they may be self-reliant, but then they lose all of their business interests outside of the U.S., as we see right now with the boycotts happening around the world. So we'll see a situation where the U.S. is going to discover, unfortunately, a whole new way of living with much less. And it's going to be hurtful for Americans. I understand it. It will be awful, particularly for poorer people. Middle-class people will sink into poverty. People who are upper middle class may have to discover frugality. And it's going to affect the world overall. It's just the way it's going to play out. Now, the interesting thing is, if you look at the historic parallels, if you go back to the unfolding of the Great Depression, if you look at the end of the Spanish flu, and you look at just previous downturns, this will be far worse than a downturn, right? Because most previous downturns are something that was either cyclical in the economy or because of some flawed investment scheme like we saw with subprime mortgages. Those were things that were not really structural, and that the rest of the economy was relatively strong, resilient, and could deal with it. But if you look at this, when it's really just structure, just destroying the underlying structure of the economy, it's the type of thing that can happen, and we see a lot of things happening much more quickly than they did in previous historic examples. So I would imagine, within 20 months from now, we are going to see, not just Wyoming, a lot of other states in significant financial problems, cities facing significant financial problems as the tax base shrinks, as the economy shrinks. And overall, the U.S. federal government no longer able to generate the income that it needs to be able to do the things that it needs. So if you think the cuts that are happening now are significant, they're the ones that are triggering a lot of this, right? Taking all those federal employees out of the workforce and taking away their paychecks and having those paychecks being spent in the community, that's a significant thing. But if you think that's bad, just wait until you see the snowball effect that happens when the feedback loop that happens when more and more people lose their jobs. And it will happen quickly, because everything seems to happen more quickly these days than it did before. These are troubling times. Some people seem joyous or excited about the U.S. economic collapse, but they shouldn't be. It's going to hurt low-income people. It's going to hurt people in the middle class, all sorts of people. It's going to hurt many, many small business owners. Anybody who's got significant debt is going to be really hurt by it. Children, individuals who have participation in the economy, but they're not out earning, will be really harmed by it. And everybody who has a loss of opportunity as a result of it. And this will go on for decades. I mean, it'll never be the same, right? So don't be excited about the economic decline that has been started by Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and the Republican Party. Don't be excited about it. Be cautious about it, and if anything, prepare yourself. You know, if you're a senior citizen on a fixed income, these are going to be difficult years. And so I discourage people being enthusiastic or taking joy in it, that's for sure.
Nothing.
So here's the real, right? Trump's economic policies are disaster. The numbers prove it, the expert confirms it, and every day Americans are feeling it firsthand. Yeah, but what do you think? Are you seeing the impact of Trump's policies in your life? Drop a comment. Let's talk. All right. Yeah, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more real talk. And I'll see you to the next one. Bye bye.